All right, so I want to welcome everyone and thank everyone for coming to the Shabbos Shuvah Drasha. At least this is already this week the third online Shabbos Shuvah that we have had as a community. Uh, all of them, including this one, are on and will be on YouTube. Uh, if I could just make us, I was asked to make a public service announcement. If everyone could please mute themselves, that'd be helpful to make the optimal listening experience for everyone. It's just a testament to our community that we have three tshuva drushas, happening all online during this period to make it as meaningful as a Aseret Yimei Tshuva, as the days leading between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, as meaningful as possible, as appropriate as possible. And just as an introduction, and it really segues into what I'd like to talk about, this year, which is, you have to talk about this year, which is the fact that we've been living in this kind of a virtual reality, and it feels like a time warp. I know I'm not the only one that feels this way. That the last 6 months feel both like an eternity and like just about the length of a week. You've no clue what day of the week it is, what month it is, how long this shutdown's been taking place. It feels like an absolute time warp, and it's so strange. And, especially I think given the fact that we live in this digital world that we live in, it only, it maximizes the volume of this, this time warp, that it really just makes it just move and move and move and move and move. I heard a great expression, that our generation is a generation that is scrolling through life, right? We're scrolling, we're swiping, we're WhatsApping through life. We're zooming through life, and it really does feel like that. It feels like we're kind of just like on Zoom, like it's just kind of going. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we're living in this kind of a digital world. Someone told me about this organization. I think it's called the organization. It's Humane Technology, Center for Humane Technology, I think it's called, which are trying to help combat some of the issues faced with, this digital world that we're living in. But I'd like to, over the short period of time we have together this evening, discuss basically how we can help prevent, some of the pitfalls that can come through living in this kind of a zoomed life, where things are just moving and moving and moving and moving and moving. Because you have to ask yourself, which is, how is it that I, am able to reset myself, which we all look forward to during this time between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and the holidays, that we look forward to this time being a time where we're able to reset ourselves. How do we reset ourselves when we are just zooming through life? How do we approach Shuvah when we are zooming through life? How do we set ourselves up for a successful year of growth when we are just zooming through life? And even the parts of life that I think most people are accustomed to, even if they do have very fast-paced lives before all of this, are accustomed to, having moments where they do stop and take stock. For example, during life cycle events, if someone has a wedding, a bat mitzvah, a bar mitzvah, a birth, a bris, something like that, a baby naming, those are moments that stop us in our tracks, that we stop and we're able to take stock on our life. But even now, when you are reading about, or you've been invited to, or you've heard about these Zoom simchas or life cycle events, it's kind of just like, oh, well, just do the wedding, right? You'll just Zoom everybody, just do it, right? Oh, just okay, so just do the bris. All right, you'll throw some things together, just do it. Just do the bar mitzvah, or we'll just pick a date and we'll just do it. Like, that's the sentiment. Even our davening has become like that, right? The cadence that's being used in the way that we describe davening now is, oh, we want to try and make it as quick as possible, right? You want to be able to get in and get out, which is true, because we want to be safe and we want to make sure that We're not going to be overexposing people, which is why we're asking people not to stay in shmooze, congregate, right? Part of shul life that we're used to, but that doesn't mean that the davening needs to be any less meaningful. But we just keep zooming and zooming and zooming and zooming and zooming, and that is the reality that we find ourselves in right now. So what I'd like for us to ask ourselves is that in this reality, how do we make sure that we treat this time and set ourselves up for when we move past this time to be one that is successful, one that we are able to reset ourselves, and one that we are able to do Shuvah during. So I'm going to share my screen over here because I want to go through just some of the sources that I think are going to help us greatly in trying to solve this this issue that we're bringing up. If you could see my screen, just give me a thumbs up. Thumbs up. Thank you, Nora. So I want to begin with a Gemara that Rabbi Jeffs went through thoroughly last night, and I highly recommend the Shuvah Drasha that Rabbi Wogelanter gave. It's on YouTube, and he went through last night in depth the 6 questions that we get asked during the final exam when we go up to Shamayim, that the Gemara tells us right over here. It says the name of Rava. Amar Rava. Rava said that b'shamash shemachnisin adam ladin, that when a person goes up for their final judgment, so they ask him questions. Omrimlo, they say, Nasata v'natata emuna, did you do business ethically? Kavati itim l'Torah, and faithfully. Kavati itim l'Torah, did you set aside time for learning Torah? Asakta b'perivia, did you help in educating, promulgating the Mesorah into the next generation? Tzipita Yeshua, did you await the salvation? Okay, and again, I highly recommend going and listening to last night's Shuvah Drasha, that you're able to get an in-depth analysis into all of these questions. But even if one is able to answer in the positive to each of these questions, that yes, I did set aside time for learning Torah, and yes, I was awaiting the salvation, and yes, I did help increase education for the next generation in Torah, and I was someone that did business both faithfully and ethically, and etc., etc., etc. I did everything 100% right. I got gold stars the whole way through. I got 100s on all of my tests. I did every single bit. I did all 613 mitzvahs. I did everything, God. Everything you wanted from me, I did. But then the next line of the Gemara is one of the most frightening lines. It's one of the lines in the entire Talmud that when you read, it stops you in your tracks. Because says the Talmud, even if you can answer yes, you can answer in the positive to every single question that Hashem asks you, says the Gemara, Va'afilu hachi, even so, I yiras Hashem hi ortso, that if Yirat Hashem, which we'll have to define more accurately in a moment, but for now we'll define as if you had reverence of God, if Yiras Hashem Hi Artso was in your storehouse, meaning that along with everything else you collected in your storehouse, and you kept all the mitzvos, and you did, and you helped other people, and you did everything, but if you did it without Yirat Hashem, without reverence of God in your storehouse, so then good. If you did it with Yirat Hashem, then you're good, but lo. But if you didn't, if Yirat Hashem was not part of the equation, if God was left out of your whole equation, so then, unfortunately, sorry, you're not going to be let into Gan Eden. Sorry, heaven is not for you. It's a troubling statement. It's one that really makes you stop and think. I mean, just the gravity of the statement of I did everything 100% right, but I did it without Yirat Hashem, without reverence of God. So then, sorry, it didn't count. What is the Talmud referring to when it says Yirat Hashem? Or better yet, let's just ask the question, which is, what is Yirat Hashem? What is reverence of God? What is this prerequisite that the Talmud is requiring us to adhere to in order to receive the blessings of the world to come? What is this prerequisite of Yirat Hashem? So let's look at the very first place that we find Yirat Hashem in the Torah. Over Rosh Hashanah, we read the story of Akedas Yitzchak. Akedas Yitzchak, where Avram and Sarah, for their entire lives, were praying and praying and praying and praying that God should give them a son. And finally, God gave them a son. Gave them Yitzchak, Isaac, Yidcha Asher Ahavcha, the one, the only, the one that you love, Yitzchak, the one that is going to be the progenitor of the Masorah, the one that is going to continue on the tradition of his father. Finally, they have the beautiful baby Yitzchak. And then what does Hashem say? Avraham, I'd like for you to take your son Yitzchak, your son Isaac, and bring him up onto the mountain for me as a sacrifice. Bring him up to me as a sacrifice. So what does Avram do? Vayashkem Avram baboker. Avram got up early in the morning because he is a faithful servant of Hashem and is going right to, as hard as it might be that he's no longer going to have Yitzchak, but he knows that he is serving the Ribbono Shel Olam, he's serving his creator, he's serving the master of the world, and therefore he gets up early, he takes Yitzchak and he brings him up onto the mountain. Then what happens is that they go onto the mountain and Yitzchak, in his righteousness, goes absolutely willingly. He sacrifices himself to Hashem. They're up on the mountain. Avram raises the knife and starts lowering it onto the neck of his son Isaac, and then picks up the pasuk right over here. Vayikra alav melach Hashem min hashamayim. That an angel from heaven screams out and says, Vayomer, and he says, Avraham, Vayomer hine. He says, Abraham, Abraham. And then Avram says, okay, I'm here. What do you need? Like, I'm doing what I'm supposed to do. What are you interrupting me? I'm in the middle of my avodas Hashem. I'm in the middle of performing a mitzvah. Don't interrupt me. Vayomer continues and says the angel, Vayomer, Al tishlach yadcha el hana'ar. Do not raise your hand against the boy, against the lad. Va'al ta'as lo me'uma. Do not do anything to him. Why? Because ata yadati. Because now I know ki yirei Elokim ata. Because now I know that you are a person who has reverence of God, because you have not withheld your only son from me, talking on behalf of God, that God is saying to Abraham, don't do anything to Yitzchak, because now I know that you are a God-fearing or God-revering person. Why right now is Avram being given this very lofty title of being a Yirei Elokim, of being someone who is who has reverence of God, who is God-fearing? Why? So Rabbi Yitzchak of Berditchev, and with this we can understand what true Yirat Hashem is, what true reverence of God is, what this truly means, these words, Yirat Hashem. The one that the Talmud is telling us is a prerequisite in order to get into the world to come and receive the blessings and the reward for all the good things you've done in this world. Says Rabbi Yitzchak of Berditchev. Rabbi Yitzchak of Berditchev, by the way, was a Hasidic master who, like many during the time that he lived 1740 in the middle of the 18th century till the beginning of the 19th century. Passed away in, I think, 1810. Rabbi Yitzchak of Berditchev was referred to by Rabbi Nachman of Breslov as the Pe'er Yisrael, the glory of Israel. Rabbi Yitzchak of Berditchev only lived 30 years, but in those 30 years of his life, he made waves in Klal Yisrael of just through simply learning psukim in the Torah. You could find simcha in your life. You could find happiness in your life. The secrets to a successful, fulfilling life just can come from reading the basic understanding of psukim in the Torah. Says Rabbi Yitzchak of Berditchev on this pasuk that what is Yirat Hashem? Yirat Hashem can't be defined as simply God-fearing or being someone that has reverence of God. But you have to look at the shorish. You have to look at the root of the word, of yireh, which means re'iyah, to see. Yireh Elokim is someone that acknowledges, experiences, recognizes God. A true Yireh Hashem, says Rabbi Yitzchak, is someone that recognizes God in every single aspect of their lives. So why is it that right now Avram is being referred to as the Yireh Hashem? Because God recognized at this moment, even though Avram passed many other tests, even though he literally jumped into a pit of fire in order to glorify God's name and in order to publicize the name of God, even though he did that, it wasn't until this point. It wasn't until the point that he was ready to sacrifice his own son, but not just simply sacrifice his son, but do something that wouldn't make any sense. Because when you stop and think about it, it doesn't make any sense that Yitzchak would have to be sacrificed. Why? Because God already promised Abraham that this was going to be his only son and going to be the son that carries on the tradition that ends up being one of the forefathers of the Jewish people. Without Yitzchak, there's no Jacob, there's no 12 tribes, there's no Moshe Rabbeinu, there's no Aaron HaKohen, there's no David HaMelech, there's no Shlomo HaMelech, there's no Ezra HaSofer, there's no Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, there's no Rambam, there's no Rashba, there's no Rashi, there's no Rabbi Kiva Eger, there's no Reb Baruch Ber Leibovitz, there's no Reb Chaim, there's no Reb Ovadia Yosef, and there's no little old me or any of you. Without Yitzchak, there's none of that. There's no Torah. So how could it have made any sense that Avram was going to sacrifice his son? Says Hashem, Ata, now I know that you're willing, you see me in everything, whether it makes sense, it doesn't make sense, whether you can understand it or you can't understand it, whether or not a pandemic was in your schedule or it wasn't in your schedule. You see me in all of it. Ata yadati ki yireh Elokim ata. Now I know that you are someone that has me in their life. You don't just have Hashem consciously, but you have God as a reality in your life, in every single aspect of your life. And this is something we've spoken about many, many, many times, of the importance of not just making God a concept, but also a reality. And this, says Rabbi Yitzchak, is the definition of true Yirat Hashem. This is definition of true Yirat Hashem. So how does one attain this? How does one attain this level of being a person who is able to experience God in every single aspect of their lives? How does one attain this? That in everything you're able to open your eyes and you see Hashem's hand in it. How? So let's take a look at the holy words of the Rambam. In the Rambam's Mishnah Torah, he writes the following: Hakel hanechbad v'hanora hazeh. This glorified and amazing and awesome God, mitzaveh la'ahavo u'yira oto, has commanded us to love him and also to yirah, now will translate as experience him. Experience God, both in the positive and in the negative. Experience comes when you are comfortable and also when you're nervous. You experience God in all of those aspects. So where do we know this from? That God commands us that we need to experience him in this way. Shena Emar, as the Torah says, V'ahavta Hashem Elokecha, that we have to love God. V'na Emar es Hashem Elokecha Tzira, and you need to be able to be, you have to have reverence of God. So now says the Rambam, exactly the question we are posing. So how does one actually attain this level? How does one actually attain the ability to see God and experience God in every single aspect of their lives with every type of emotion? So says the Rambam the following: Bisha Now listen very closely to the words of the Rambam, because you all know it intuitively, and every single one of you in your lives have experienced this, but the Rambam affirms the feelings we've all had at some point in our lives. Bish'a sheyisbonein ha'adam b'ma'asav u'beruav. The way a person is able to experience Yirat Hashem, to get to a place where they're able to experience God, it happens when you're yisbonein, when you contemplate b'ma'asav, in the workings of God, in the creations of God. Haneflaim hagedolim, these wondrous and unbelievable creations of God. V'yira mehen chachmaso, you see from these things God's amazing wisdom. When some of you might know the story, but when Brooke and I were taking our honeymoon, and I'm tempted to just unmute Brooke so she could just tell this story. But when Brooke and I were taking our honeymoon, so we honeymooned out to the west. We were living in New Jersey, and we honeymooned out to the west to come to San Diego, and we're going around. We go to the zoo, we go to SeaWorld, and someone tells us, they say, you know what? It was actually my brother who said to us, he said, you know what? You have to go to this place called La Jolla, and you have to go check out Torrey Pines. So we said, okay, fine. We're not like the most outdoorsy people. We're not, the people that are nature-esque, which is a prerequisite for living in La Jolla. But yeah, okay, fine. So we'll go check out Torrey Pines. We're walking through Torrey Pines, and we're looking out, and Brooke turns to me, she comments, and she says, it's one of those moments like the Rambam's describing. It's breathtaking. It's like, it's obvious. Like, it's obvious Hashem runs the world. I mean, just look around you, right? You're looking out into the Pacific Ocean, and scientists say that, we've only discovered about 5% of what's beneath what's beneath the ocean surface. All right. It's overwhelming. It's breathtaking. It's something that imbues in a person Yirat Shamayim. The second half of that story, by the way, is that Brooke then turns to me and says, you know what? If we're planning on becoming, a rabbi in Rebbetzin, we're planning on going to Rabbanis, make sure we end up in La Jolla. So it worked out. So you look out at the world around you. It is unbelievable. It's unbelievable. But that's something like a vast ocean. That's something like a vast ocean. So that might be easier. But take even, for example, my seltzer, in my seltzer, there is CO2 added. Each and every one of those small bubbles that are generating themselves inside of my seltzer, those CO2 bubbles, every single one of them exists because God wills it to be. You need to stop and just contemplate that for a moment. Every single small little bubble in the world, every broken leaf, every single drip of sap that falls by the big Torrey pine in the middle of the shul exists because God wills it to be. B'shah sheyisbonein ha'adam b'ma'asav, says the Rambam. When a person stops and contemplates every single creation that God made. And then he says, then you think about ubruav haneflaim hagedolim. Then you think about something like the Pacific Ocean and everything in between. Then you're able to really experience God, and it's an exercise. The students of Rav Shach Zatzal. Rav Shach lived throughout the entire 20th century, literally throughout the entire 20th century. He was born in 1899 and passed away in 2001. He lived throughout the entire 20th century. And he was a student in the Panovich Yeshiva. He was a student in the Slobodki Yeshiva, which, by the way, Rav Shach went to the Slobodki Yeshiva, I think, when he was 12 years old. The Slobodki Yeshiva, you have to understand, was a yeshiva designated for all of the elite students in Eastern Europe. And he was already enrolled there by the time he was 12 years old. He then went to go learn with Reb Isser Zalman Meltzer in Slutsk. Later on, Rav Shach, when he immigrated to Eretz Yisrael, he became the Rosh Yeshiva of the Panovich Yeshiva that now still stands today in Bnei Brak. So when the students of Rav Shach asked him, they said, Rebbe, how do we attain Yirat Shamayim? How do we attain this level of reverence of God, that we're able to experience God in our lives? So he quoted for them this Rambam, and he said that, the exercise I use is every time I eat an apple. When I eat an apple, I pick up an apple. I examine the apple. And the apple has a beautiful protective shell around it, the skin, the protective skin around the apple. Within that protective skin, there's this white meaty flesh full of vitamins and nutrients that is delicious, sweet, and healthy for you. And then in the inside, in the core, behind all, in the middle of all this white meaty flesh, behind it all, there are these 5 little seeds that if someone cares for and someone protects and manages the right way and plants them and cares for the plants properly, so then you can end up growing a tree that can produce hundreds more of these delicious snacks. And only then I'll take a bracha and take a bite of the apple. That's how you end up, and you could choose anything in life, but it's just one tool to be able to build this level of Yirat Hashem, where a person is able to experience God. Rabbi Chanan Wasserman Zatzal, who unfortunately, along with I think 5,000 other Jews on Yud Aleph Tammuz in 1944, was rounded up and murdered by the Nazis. Rabbi Chanan Wasserman was the closest student of the Chavetz Chaim. He was the Rosh Yeshiva of a high school yeshiva called Baranovich, which was really a preparatory school to prepare students to go on to yeshivas like Slobodka and Mir and Panovich. Rabbi Chanan Wasserman says that there's a pasuk in Koheles, the second last pasuk in Koheles, really tells us that this is a fundamental aspect of being not just a Jew. This is not just a prerequisite to doing mitzvot, but this is a prerequisite to being a human. This is part of the definition of being a human itself, being a person. Says the pasuk in Koheles, Shlomo Melech says, Sof davar hakol nishma, that at the end of the day, at the end of the matter, at the sum of it all, Sof davar hakol nishma, when all is said and done, es halokim yira, that a person needs to be able to have Yirat Shamayim. They need to be able to have this kind of an experience of God. Ves mitzvosav shemor, and then through that you fulfill the mitzvos, which is exactly, by the way, what the Baal HaTurim says. The Baal HaTurim says on the pasuk of Re'ei Anochi Nosin Lefnechem Hayom Bracha Uklala, that the key to receiving bracha in life is by, says the pasuk further, as a bracha asher tishmor, that if you do the mitzvos, you receive bracha. Says the Baal HaTurim that if you look closely at the pasuk uses the language of Re'ei Anochi. See that the speaker in this pasuk is Moshe Rabbeinu. It can't be that Moshe Rabbeinu is the one that's giving this choice to receive bracha in your life by doing mitzvos. So what's Anochi referring to? It's referring to the pasuk of the first of the Aseret Dibros, Anochi Hashem Elokecha. Belief in God, understanding God, experiencing God, that when you experience God in life, and through that vehicle, through that perspective, you do mitzvos, so then ki ze kol ha'adam. This is what mankind is. The definition of a person is one where they have the ability to have Yirat Shamayim. The definition of a person, the prerequisite of how to define a person versus other beings, versus other animals, versus other mammals is just the notion where we have the ability to experience God versus others that don't. This, by the way, is exactly the way Rashi explains this pasuk. The pasuk by Avram Avinu, by the Akedah. That after Avram Avinu brings up his son, and God says after Avram does not slaughter, after God stops Avram from going through with offering Yitzchak as a sacrifice, So Hashem says, we just saw the pasuk before, Ata yadati, now I know, ki yireh Elokim ata, that you are someone who can experience God in your life. Says Rashi, ma'ata yeshli maleheshiv l'satan l'umas u'le'umos. And now I have what to reply to the other nations of the world and to the Satan. I know what to respond to them. Hatzemeim, that are going to ask me, that are going to, that throughout the generations. And we know that even today, there are people that are alive and well asking the question of what is the purpose of the Jews? What is so great about them? Why are they the chosen nation? Now I have what to respond to them. What? Mahi chibaschi elecha. Why is it that I love you, Avraham, and I love your children, and I love your offspring so much? Because of the fact that we are people that acknowledge this. We are people that acknowledge this prerequisite of being a person, of being someone that is able to experience God in their lives. Says Shlomo HaMelech in Mishlei. Shlomo HaMelech says, Yiras Hashem, Reishis Da'as. Yirat Hashem, having this kind of a perspective where one is able to experience God in their life, is the beginning of all knowledge, the starting place for attaining any knowledge in life is having Yirat Shamayim, having the perspective of being able to experience God in your life. Then continues Shlomo Melech, Chachma u'Musar evilim bazu, that those that don't have this, those that don't have Yirat Shamayim, that don't use their innate human ability to be able to experience God in their lives, they will hate Chachma, they hate true wisdom. They despise any sort of discipline. Because they're not experiencing God in their lives. They're not stopping like Rav to just analyze an apple for a moment. They're not stopping as they're driving up from the 52 going west and exiting into La Jolla Scenic, that you're able to, La Jolla Parkway or whatever it's called, that you're able to just look to the left and see the Pacific Ocean and take just stock of that. That without just stopping for a moment every once in a while and just thinking to myself, oh my gosh, I'm breathing. My heart is beating. Just stopping and taking these kinds of moments to recognize the fact that God is in every single aspect of our lives. Says the Ran Rabbeinu Nissen, one of the later Sephardic Rishonim, was a commentary on the Rif, on Rabbeinu Alfasi, who was one of the very, very early Sephardic Rishonim. Says the Ran the following in his Drashas. He says, this is what Shlomo Melech means. Yirtze bezeh shireshis haseichel v'yisodo hu yiras Hashem. That the ability to be cognizant and gain any sort of wisdom in life is Yirat Hashem, because that is going to inform every single aspect of your life. Umi sheyesh lo yesod, and someone that has this foundation, so then yuchol livnos alav. Then you can build a whole building. You can actualize your potential. You can gain something that even through a pandemic where you're stuck in this zoomed out world and you're living in this life where the world is just moving and moving and moving and moving and moving, and you're scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and swiping and swiping and WhatsApping and WhatsApping. But if Yiras Hashem is the thing that remains constant, then it's never going to feel like a time warp. That every single one of those moments is something that's going to be real. The sentence of, oh, just do the wedding, just do the bar mitzvah, just get through davening, it won't exit your mouth. Or if it does, it's going to mean something very, very different. David HaMelech, Shlomo HaMelech's father, says it perfectly. Not that he needs my approbation. Reishis Chachma Yiras Hashem. The beginning of all wisdom is Yiras Hashem. Seichel Tov L'chol Haseyim. That someone who practices Yiras Hashem, someone who understands this, so then Seichel Tov L'chol Haseyim, then they receive this Seichel Tov, they receive this proper outlook on life. They're going to have pure good thoughts, always. It's never going to be that the world is just passing by them. Rather, they are taking stock of their lives the whole way through. I want to point to now a Gemara. And this Gemara is one where when you first read it, it's kind of like, well, it's not talking to me. It's maybe too much for me to be able to take on. But when you stop and you think about and you apply Yiras Hashem the way that we're defining it, as not God-fearing or not someone that has reverence of God, but someone that experiences God, I think it now gives it a whole new meaning. V'amar Rabbi Chanina said, Hakol biyedei shamayim, that everything is in the hands of God. Every single thing is in the hands of God. Whether or not there is going to be schools open, whether or not shuls are going to be open, whether or not restaurants are going to be open, supermarkets are even going to be open, whether or not there's going to be a vaccine, there isn't going to be a vaccine. Whether all of these things, hakol biyedei shamayim, everything's in the hands of Hashem. Everything. Except for one thing. Chutz miyiras shamayim. Except for living with this kind of a perspective. Shene'emar, and it comes straight from the Torah. As the pasuk says, Va'ata Yisrael, now Hashem, now Jewish people, listen. Israelites, listen. Ma Hashem Elokecha shol mimach. What does Hashem ask of you? Only just one thing. Ki im li'ira es Hashem Elokecha. Just to fear God. Says the Gemara, Atu Yiras Shamayim milser zutrahi. Hold on, Yiras Shamayim is such a small thing that it's kind of like, oh, don't worry about it. You don't have a lot to worry about, Jewish people. I know the Torah may seem overwhelming, but if you want to just sum it up, really all Hashem wants from you is Yiras Shamayim. Yiras Shamayim is a big thing. It's huge. It's a lot. But when you stop and analyze exactly what Yiras Shamayim is, it's just Hashem wants you to be able to experience Him. And it's such a funny thing because when you stop and, you say this to a person who, yeah, of course, Rabbi, like, what do you mean? I daven, I learn Torah, right? I do the mitzvos. I listened to Shofar this year. I made sure to pick up a machzor because I knew I was going to be davening at home. I'm going to be fasting this Yom Kippur. Yeah, I ordered a lulav and esrog, and I'm going to sit in a sukkah. What do you mean? Like, of course, obviously, Yiras Hashem. Of course. But when you stop and think about the fact that even in mitzvos, you need to be able to do it with the perspective of, well, there's God here. There's God here. Just stop and think about that for a moment. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, Zecher Tzadik V'Kodesh L'Vracha. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, by the way, his last name was not Salanter. His name was not Salanter. That's where he was from. He was from the town of Salant. But Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, who actually did live a relatively long life. He lived from 1809 to about 1880 or 1885 about. Rabbi Yisrael Salanter, his last name is Lipkin. Rabbi Yisrael Zev Lipkin. He founded a movement. The movement is known as the Musar movement. What's the Musar movement? The movement of discipline. So what it has become is, basically that scheduled into a person's daily life should be moments, mindful moments where they experience Hashem, where they remind themselves of Yiras Hashem. They practice, right? Like, people practice, mindfulness exercises. That's basically what Musar is mindfulness exercises. Now it's developed into, reading, books written by our early sages like the Ramchal and Rabbeinu B'chaya or the Ramban, in order to get insights into character development and the like. But essentially what it is, and the way that Rabbi Yisrael Salanter originally, presented it as, was simply just making sure that you do mindfulness exercises to make sure that you're not just, life is not passing you by. You're not zooming through life, but you actually have time to stop and analyze what you do every single step along the way. And he published an essay. It was the only thing that Rabbi Yisrael Salanter ever published in his lifetime. He published an essay towards the end of his life. I believe it was in 1880. He published it in a local Yiddish magazine. And the essay was called the Igeres HaMusar, the letter about Musar, about learning Musar, the study of Musar, and why it's so important. And in the essay, he says that life is a battle. What's the battle? He doesn't say it's a battle between the Yetzer Hara or the Yetzer HaTov, between your good inclination, your positive pull versus your negative pull, right? That's not what it is. It's not a battle of good versus evil. You know what the battle of life is? Between Seichel and Dimion, between being a thoughtful person, being a person that actually thinks before they act, knows what they're doing in everything, versus a person that's calculated, versus someone who is run by dimion, versus living life that's run by imagination. You're kind of just like going and going and going. You're not thinking. It's just like the world is just passing you by. It's the difference between using your seichel and using your dimion. And it says Rabbi Slanter that it's really just combating habitual nature, which is what human beings are. We're habitual beings, and it's just trying to combat that. And he says it's both in positive things and negative things. Just stop and think before you do. Why is it that you're going to pick up this for lunch versus that for lunch? Did you think before you said this bracha? Before you ate that apple? Do you have Yiras Hashem? Yiras Hashem hi ortzo. As Rava said, that if Yiras Hashem, if this kind of a perspective of being able to experience Hashem in our lives, if that accompanies your storehouse, if that is the thing that fills up your storehouse, that it's not just all of the mitzvos that you've done and all the good things and you've checked a lot of boxes, but rather every single aspect of it was done with Yirat Hashem, through experiencing God, doing it in a thoughtful way. If you took time to stop and smell even the virtual roses, then that is how you can guarantee yourself a spot in the world to come, and even in this world, living a life of meaning and bracha. Yom Kippur is a great opportunity to start practicing Yiras Hashem. Yiras Hashem is not is not something that is a concept that you have to try and fulfill. Yiras Hashem is something even artificial that you can bring into your life, that applies to every aspect of your life. And Yom Kippur is a great time to start practicing these mindful exercises of Yiras Hashem, because Yom Kippur is primed for it. There's no food, you're not eating, you're davening a lot of the day. It's time where you're stopping and thinking, and just try and think about one thing, like Roshach, the apple, seltzer, passing by the Pacific Ocean. Try and choose just one thing in your life and think about it over Yom Kippur. What's that one thing that I can stop and use to be my symbol of Yiras Hashem? And it can act as a microcosm for every other aspect of your life, that eventually it grows and grows and grows and becomes more natural and more natural and more natural. If you try and take on this heavy concept of trying to be mindful of every single aspect of your life, like Rabbi Shalom says, that it's going to be overwhelming. It's going to be too much. You're going to break in 2 days. Pick one small thing that you're mindful of, that it reminds you of Hashem. Like the Rambam says in another place, mezuzah does that. We spoke about that before Rosh Hashanah. And that's what my grandmother used to use. Allah Shalom. To practice Yiras Hashem in your life. To stop, to think, appreciate, and say, thank you, Hashem. In that way, answering these 6 questions is going to be a piece of cake. Living a meaningful life is going to be something that ends up being natural. Not going to have to work very hard for it. And that even in this time, it will change from being something that's a time warp to being something that is a meaningful time. They're able to find blessings in. And hopefully, God willing, this year, 5-7 8-1 is going to be a year that even if there's pandemonium and chaos all over the rest of the world, but I have my Yiras Hashem, I have my focus, and therefore I'm experiencing Hashem even in a time like this. I wish everyone a Gemar Tov, a Chesiv Chesima Tova. I actually want to take this moment, I want to take this opportunity to, before we sign off, just ask everyone here on the Zoom call. I know we're not going to be able to see everyone before Yontiv or on Yontiv, so I just wanted to personally just ask everyone here for personal mechila. I apologize for not calling enough, for not being there enough, especially during this time and even before this time. And I just want to personally just ask mechila and ask that you can dig deep to find some forgiveness. And I promise none of it was ever meant maliciously, but rather just was meant as was just a pshia, was just being negligent, unfortunately. And God willing, I hope that in the future I'll be able to improve and be there more for you guys.